Hello everybody, welcome to my channel.
James Cagney, the reluctant gangster who redefined Hollywood. James Cagney remains one of the most electric figures from Hollywood's golden era, a performer whose intensity, speed and presence reshape what an on-screen star could be. Born July 17, 1899, on New York's Lower East Side, Cagney grew up in a working-class Irish-American family and carried that streetwise energy with him for the rest of his career. Before films came calling, he bounced through jobs and performance gigs, eventually making his way into vaudeville and then Broadway. It didn't take long for audiences to notice he had something different: sharp timing, natural charisma, and physicality that felt alive. Cagney shot to movie stardom when Warner Brothers cast him in The Public Enemy, 1931. The film's iconic grapefruit scene practically minted him as Hollywood's new face of the gangster era. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Cagney brought a layered, dangerous charm to criminal roles. His characters weren't just thugs, they were combustible combinations of vulnerability, rage and wit, often shaped by the tough world from which they came. Across films like Angels with Dirty Faces, 1938, and White Heat, 1949, he set the template for generations of crime film antiheroes. But Cagney was far more than a gangster archetype. He had the heart of a song and dance man, something he proved definitively with his Oscar-winning performance as George M. Cohan in Yankee Doodle Dandy, 1942. The film showcased his exuberant energy, crisp footwork, and surprisingly rousing musical abilities. It also gave him a chance to step outside the hardened roles he had become associated with, revealing a warmth and charm that audiences immediately embraced. Throughout his career, Cagney maintained a famously independent streak. He clashed with Warner Brothers over pay and creative control, eventually becoming one of the first major stars to break from the studio system and operate as a free agent. Off-screen, he lived quietly on his farm, painting, writing, and avoiding the Hollywood spotlight as much as possible. Despite his tough guy screen persona, those who knew him described him as thoughtful, disciplined, and deeply loyal. James Cagney's influence on film acting is undeniable. His rapid-fire delivery, explosive energy, and instinctive realism helped pull American screen acting toward a more modern style. The echoes of his performances can still be felt in contemporary crime dramas, musicals, and character-driven storytelling. When he retired, he left behind a body of work that remains vital, fierce, and endlessly watchable. He died on March 30, 1986, but his legend never cooled. James Cagney didn't just play characters who seized the moment, he built a career out of doing exactly that. Hollywood never looked the same afterward. James Cagney, a firebrand performer whose presence transformed American cinema. James Francis Cagney Jr. emerged from a crowded Manhattan tenement with a restless drive that would eventually make him one of the most dynamic actors ever to hit the screen. Growing up in the gritty Lower East Side at the turn of the century, he absorbed the rhythms of the street, the fast talk, the scrappy humor, and the instinct for survival. These qualities didn't just color his personality, they became the backbone of his acting style. As a young man, Cagney didn't set out to become a movie star. He studied art, worked odd jobs and stumbled into show business almost by accident after auditioning for a stage production on a dare. Vaudeville sharpened his instincts. Broadway expanded his possibilities. What audiences saw was a performer who moved with a boxer's readiness and a dancer's precision, someone who could shift from humor to menace in the space of a heartbeat. Hollywood snapped him up in 1930, but even then, he wasn't particularly dazzled by the Dream Factory. Cagney stayed grounded, practical, and uninterested in celebrity trappings. His explosion onto the cinematic landscape came with The Public Enemy, 1931. The gangster genre was already heating up, but Cagney detonated something new inside it. His Tom Powers was both terrifying and magnetic, a street kid twisted by circumstance but propelled by charm and explosive bravado. The film established the public's image of Cagney, though the actor himself never felt overly attached to gangster roles. Still, the persona stuck because he played it like nobody else, quick, unpredictable, and intensely human. Across the 1930s and 1940s, Cagney starred in a steady wave of Warner Brothers films that showcased his versatility. In Angels with Dirty Faces, he delivered one of the most haunting endings of the era, leaving audiences to debate whether his character's final moments were an act of cowardice or courage. In Each Dawn I Die, G-Men, The Roaring Twenties, and Blonde Crazy, he kept refining the Cagney brand, tough but intelligent, fiery but grounded. Yet his transition to Yankee Doodle Dandy in 1942 remains one of cinema's great left turns. It wasn't just that he danced and sang, it was that he danced and sang with such full-bodied joy that he seemed lit from within. Cagney had grown up tapping in vaudeville clubs, so the craft wasn't new to him, but the scale was. His dance style was crisp, athletic and uniquely his own, relying on rhythm and spirit instead of Broadway polish. Critics and audiences were stunned. The Academy took notice. The film gave him his long-awaited Best Actor Oscar and proved that he wasn't trapped by his own myth. Cagney's notorious contract battles with Jack Warner became part of Hollywood lore. He fought relentlessly for fair pay and creative respect, even taking the unprecedented step of suing the studio in the mid-1930s. He eventually won greater autonomy, and later formed his own production company, a rare move for an actor of his era. This independence was a cornerstone of his character. He valued integrity over glamour and didn't hesitate to walk away from lucrative offers if they didn't align with his principles. Away from the camera, Cagney was almost nothing like the volatile figures he portrayed. Friends described him as gentle, shy, and private. He preferred the quiet of his farm in New York, where he raised horses, painted landscapes, and lived with a calmness that belied his screen persona. He married Frances Willard Billy Vernon in 1922 and stayed married to her for 64 years. One of the most stable unions in Hollywood history. His late-career masterpiece White Heat, 1949, delivered one more jolt to audiences who thought they knew everything he could do. As Cody Jarrett, a volatile gangster plagued by psychological torment, Cagney burned with a terrifying, almost Shakespearean intensity. The film's final explosion has become one of cinema's defining images. A perfect fusion of actor and character. After a gradual retreat from acting in the 1950s and 60s, Cagney settled into a peaceful semi-retirement, occasionally reappearing in select roles. His final performance in Ragtime, 1981, was a graceful bow from a man who never needed to prove anything again. James Cagney passed away in 1986 at the age of 86. Leaving behind a film legacy that remains startlingly fresh. Modern actors still point to him as a blueprint for authenticity, emotional truth, and fearless commitment. Whether he was smashing grapefruits, tapping down patriotic staircases, or snarling atop an oil tank, he did it with a raw honesty that audiences could feel. Cagney didn't just entertain. He set a standard. He changed the temperature of the room. He made cinema move faster, hit harder, and feel more alive. James Cagney. Craft, control, controversy, and the making of an American original. James Cagney stands today as one of the rare actors whose screen presence never feels dated. Even decades after his prime, there's something startlingly modern about the way he moved, spoke and reacted. Actors from Marlon Brando to Jack Nicholson to Leonardo DiCaprio have cited him as an influence. And film historians often say Cagney helped lay the early groundwork for what would become method-inflected realism. That's remarkable considering he rose to fame during an era dominated by theatricality and rigid studio expectations. The Cagney method, instinct, precision and velocity. What made Cagney mesmerizing wasn't any formal acting school, it was instinct sharpened by experience. He studied people, he mimicked accents, he watched body language in saloons and on street corners. When he performed, his movements were compact and efficient, almost like a prizefighter protecting his space. Directors loved him because he hit his marks with surgical accuracy, but they also knew he might ignite a scene with a burst of unexpected energy. Co-stars sometimes described acting with Cagney as a jolt of electricity. He kept them alert, he kept audiences awake, and he proved that on-screen tension didn't have to be big or loud. Often it was coiled, simmering, ready to pop at any second. Challenging the studio machine. Cagney's battles with Warner Brothers became legendary because he dared to challenge a system designed to keep stars compliant. Jack Warner adored Cagney's box office power but resented the actor's refusal to be bullied. Cagney walked out, sued for breach of contract, and won concessions that paved the way for future stars to negotiate better terms. At one point, Warner threatened to blacklist him. Cagney shrugged and went home to work on his farm. That was pure Cagney, mission first, ego last. He famously said he joined the film business because it paid well, not because he wanted fame. So losing Hollywood's approval never scared him. Politics, loyalties and misinformation. Cagney's political identity was more complex than the studio publicity machines made it seem. In the 1930s, he supported labor unions and progressive causes, which led to baseless accusations that he had communist ties. He appeared before a committee, cleared his name, and never expressed resentment about it. What mattered to him was fairness. He paid people well, treated crews respectfully and viewed the film set as a workplace rather than a hierarchy. At the same time, he was fiercely patriotic. His performance in Yankee Doodle Dandy wasn't just acting, it was something he poured his heart into. Friends said he considered it the role that most aligned with his values and worldview. Working style and on-set reputation. Despite all those gangster characters, Cagney ran a quiet, kind set. He didn't tolerate yelling, disrespect or carelessness. He avoided method antics, believing preparation happened before the cameras rolled. He had little patience for actors who manufactured drama for attention, though he never criticized colleagues publicly. His professionalism set a tone that people admired even if they couldn't emulate it. Cagney the Dancer, a second legacy. It's impossible to overstate how exceptional Cagney's dancing was. He didn't float through choreography, he attacked it with rhythmic precision. His tap sequences were crisp, percussive and effortlessly musical. Even Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire praised him, noting that his style wasn't polished Broadway elegance but something raw and distinctly American. The staircase sequence in Yankee Doodle Dandy, where he practically vaults from step to step, remains one of the great blasts of pure physical joy in Hollywood musicals. Later career and gentle fade into private life. After White Heat, Cagney chose roles selectively. He didn't crave the spotlight and didn't feel the need to cling to stardom. He wrote his autobiography, Cagney by Cagney, 1985, in a tone that matched his personality, honest, unpretentious and refreshingly direct. By the 1970s, he spent most of his time painting, tending his orchard and enjoying the quiet pace of rural life. His marriage to Billie Vernon remained the emotional center of his world. Their partnership was unusually solid for the entertainment industry, rooted in loyalty and comfort rather than spectacle. His return in ragtime near the end of his life added a graceful epilogue to his career. Even at an advanced age, the spark was still there. You could see the old snap in his eyes. A legacy that refuses to fade. James Cagney's legend endures because he embodied contradictions that made him three-dimensional long before Hollywood learned to favor complexity. He could be brutal or tender, explosive or soft-spoken. He was the dangerous gangster and the patriotic showman, the rebel who fought the system and the gentle soul who preferred farming to fame. Most actors can claim a few great roles. Cagney can claim that he shocked, moved and fascinated audiences across multiple genres and multiple eras. The grapefruit may have made him famous, but the craft made him timeless. James Cagney, the art of presence, the power of restraint and the persona that Hollywood couldn't contain. By the time James Cagney became one of the highest-paid stars in Hollywood, he had already broken half the rules that supposedly governed movie stardom. In an era obsessed with suave glamour and carefully sculpted personas, Cagney brought grit, speed and emotional unpredictability. He looked like a guy you might bump into on a New York side street. That relatability turned into his superpower. He made ordinary men feel seen. And he made extraordinary characters feel real. A working-class performer with working-class roots. Cagney's upbringing wasn't the tragic, Dickensian kind Hollywood sometimes romanticizes. But it was tough enough to shape him. His father died young. His mother, a strong-willed woman, kept the family afloat through sheer resilience. Cagney worked early and often. Bellhop, waiter, office golfer, amateur boxer. These weren't character-building exercises, they were survival. Later, he'd say the Lower East Side taught him to read people instantly and spot trouble before it found him. That street education later showed up in his films. Watch him in The Roaring Twenties. There's a moment where he doesn't even speak, he just leans in with that half smile, half warning. You can almost feel the actor's early life pulsing through the frame. Why his gangster characters hit different. When you revisit early gangster films, you notice something. A lot of them feel like waxworks now. But not Cagney's. His characters weren't mustache-twirling villains. They were shaped by desperation, loyalty, betrayal and that familiar human itch for dignity. He made you understand why these men did what they did, even if you didn't condone it. Part of this came from his respect for working people. He once said he played criminals the way he played any character. People looking for a break in a system that offered few. That nuance elevated the entire genre. In White Heat, his Cody Jarrett is practically Shakespearean. The relationship with his mother is twisted and tender at the same time, and Cagney sells the emotional volatility without melodrama. It's ferocious but grounded. You believe every twitch. A surprisingly physical actor before physical actors were cool. Long before Hollywood discovered action stars, Cagney was throwing punches, leaping across sets and moving with kinetic force. He didn't have a stuntman for most of his early career. Directors often said he was one of the quickest movers they'd ever filmed. Watch the final shootout of The Public Enemy. He's not posing. He's not telegraphing, he's in motion, reacting like a street fighter. Cagney's body language became iconic. The slight forward lean, the clipped, rhythmic walk, the way he snapped his shoulders when he laughed, the small, sharp gestures, almost like a dancer switching tempo mid-beat. Let's talk about that dance style. It's wild that one of Hollywood's most famous, tough guys, also turned out to be one of its most memorable dancers. But Cagney moved like someone who lived in rhythm. His taps weren't gentle, they had weight and attitude. He danced like he was challenging the floor to keep up. Gene Kelly once said Cagney's dancing was pure energy. Perfectly channeled, which is a compliment from a man who literally redefined movie musicals. A quiet rebel in the studio system, the studio era was a machine, and Cagney was never built to be a cog. He renegotiated contracts at a time when actors were supposed to sit still. He pushed back on typecasting. He refused roles he found morally uninteresting. When Warner Brothers took advantage of him, he sued and walked. He even helped found the Screen Actors Guild, which didn't exactly endear him to the power players. Yet he wasn't trying to be a martyr. He just believed in fairness. That simplicity made him rare. Behind the scenes, loyalty and discipline. Plenty of actors from that era had big personalities that spilled into chaos. Cagney wasn't one of them. He showed up early, knew everyone's name on set, and treated grips and prop workers with the same courtesy as producers. He didn't drink much. He didn't chase scandal. He married once and stayed married. He never trashed colleagues, even when they deserved it. To this day, studio veterans talk about him with a kind of warm respect that's unusual for old Hollywood. Retirement, the gentleman farmer. Cagney's retreat from Hollywood wasn't dramatic. It was intentional. He built a life on his farm in Dutchess County, raising horses, painting landscapes, and enjoying the company of Billy Vernon, the love of his life. Visitors said he radiated calm. The famous spark was still there, but it glowed differently, like a lantern instead of a firecracker. Even in retirement, he stayed curious. He practiced drawing. He read history. He walked the land daily. His life slowed down but didn't shrink. The Last Beau when Cagney returned to film in Ragtime, 1981. It wasn't for money or legacy building. He just liked the project. His presence in the film acts like a bridge between eras. The last great avatar of Hollywood's early golden age stepping into a modern American story. It's quiet, dignified, and fitting. Enduring legacy. Cagney shaped the DNA of American acting. You see echoes of him in Brando's internal volatility, Pacino's coiled intensity, Nicholson's sly unpredictability, Denzel Washington's precision. His influence crosses genres because his craft wasn't genre-based. It was human-based. Plenty of stars burned bright and faded. Cagney continues to crackle. James Cagney. Building the blueprint for the modern screen actor. By the midpoint of the 20th century, James Cagney occupied a strange and fascinating place in Hollywood. He was both the quintessential product of the studio era and one of the first stars to reshape its boundaries. His career wasn't just a string of hits. It was a series of experiments that pushed film acting towards something sharper, more intimate, and more psychologically aware. A performer driven by curiosity instead of ego, Cagney wasn't seduced by the myth of Hollywood greatness. What he was seduced by was mastery. When he first arrived at Warner Brothers, he spent days walking around sets, watching camera operators, lighting crews, gaffers, and editors at work. He wanted to understand every piece of the machine. That curiosity made him a more precise performer. He knew how light hit his face, how sound carried, how cuts affected rhythm. He built scenes like a craftsman, not a showboat. Cagney often said acting was a job done with discipline, not mystery. You prepared, you listened, you told the truth, you stayed alert, and you gave your partner something to work with. His rapport with directors, mutual respect or mutual fireworks. Many directors adored working with him because he showed up ready to deliver. Others found him intimidating because he was quick, sharp, and allergic to nonsense. Michael Curtiz, Raoul Walsh, and William Keithley knew how to harness his energy. He respected directors who respected the crew, moved efficiently, and didn't treat filmmaking like a vanity project. There's an old story about a director who tried using flowery language to inspire him before a scene. Cagney politely nodded, walked back to his mark and quietly said to a colleague, "He doesn't know what he wants. Let's just do the scene." Then he nailed the take. The power of his eyes. Most stars of the 1930s relied on posture, theater-trained diction or exaggerated gestures. Cagney did it with his eyes. Those sharp, searching glances carried fear, loyalty, mischief, fury or tenderness depending on how he calibrated them. He didn't need speeches. Give him a 2-second close-up and he'd do the heavy lifting with a single flicker of expression. That's why his performances still feel modern. The camera loved him because his smallest movements carried weight. The way he brought morality into immorality. Cagney's gangsters weren't cartoon villains. Even at his most explosive, he grounded them in some inner logic: loyalty to a friend, love for a parent, hunger for respect, fear of abandonment. He made sure there was always a sliver.
Bye bye. Thanks for watching. Bye.